Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast. Catch us live weekdays at 7 a.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay or Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
Jason Draho joins us right now. He's with UBS. He's head of America's Tactical Asset.
Wow.
Worst job at UPS. It's like being in charge of Swiss franc.
Yep.
What are you tactically asset allocating into 2025 with everything that's going on? Do you just pull aside and stay in cash?
No, we actually upgraded equities about a month ago, make them attractive.
Okay.
Still kind of have confidence in the macro outlook. That hasn't changed with the election. It's added some volatility, the outcome, certainly to the potential paths. But by and large, we think this is bull market and equities keep going higher.
So, I mean, what changed for you 2 weeks ago, election day? Did anything change for you guys as you think about allocating assets, stocks, bonds, alternatives, U.S., non-U.S.? Has anything changed for you guys?
Not fundamentally. So the way I would kind of describe it is that our expected value stayed the same. The variance and distribution probably got wider of different outcomes. So certain positions that we've kind of recommended, like gold, which has actually pulled back, that somebody thought is a hedge, I think that's actually become more attractive since that time. The view on rates, ultimately kind of drifting lower, that has not really changed. I think we probably got a little more confidence in certain areas of equities like financials, potentially benefiting from deregulation. But I think overall the core thesis has not really changed.
Did you take your expectation for earnings higher, thinking that taxes are coming down potentially under a Trump administration?
We have not adjusted our earnings. Ultimately, look, we think they'll extend the personal tax cuts. I think anything beyond extension of existing tax cuts, that seems I wouldn't make that the base case. Just there's not a lot of fiscal scope for further expansion or further tax cuts. That's our view at this point.
You don't think there'll be further material tax
like
cuts?
something along the lines of reinstituting the sort of accelerated depreciation, things that were actually discussed earlier this year in part of the budget deal, but not further taking down of tax cuts, not as a base case.
How do you think about the allocation, stocks, bonds, alternatives? I mean, Tom and I grew up in the 60-40 era. That's not a thing anymore, is it?
Well, it's not a bad starting point.
Okay.
The question is, how do you improve on that? And I think that the key thing about the 60-40, why it works so well for decades, a couple of decades for sure, is that stocks and bonds had a negative correlation. And that was because I think in part inflation was contained. When inflation is contained, it can sort of have that negative correlation. When you're worried about inflation, think about what happened in 2022, stocks and bonds sell off. Yeah. Inflation will be, I think, upside risks kind of going forward. In that case, you need other things to diversify your portfolio. So it's like, the 40-30-30, I'm thinking more along the lines of adding alternatives, especially for clients who have larger portfolios can move into those asset classes.
Jason, at Yale University, there's always this is Bob Schiller's legacy, there's always a fundamental of finance over your economics. What's the track record of rebalancing in asset allocation in recent years? Granted, we've had 3 once-in-a-lifetime events, but do you still have a theoretical confidence in rebalancing, or do you tilt more to a longer buy and hold strategy?
Well, rebalancing on a regular basis, becomes a little bit more systematic. I think that the data would show that actually adds value. Like there's a rebalancing alpha, so to speak. I think where the tricky part comes in is that markets move very fast, and now they move very quickly. I think about what happened in the summer when the S&P was down almost 10% in about 2.5 weeks, and then it almost fully recovered in 2 weeks. So the question is, do you rebalance then or not rebalance? I think that's kind of complicated matters, but conceptually, I think rebalancing is adds value over time.
You guys have a S&P price target of 6,600. Tom likes these round numbers by December 2025. Is that earnings driven, multiple driven, a little bit of both?
It's mostly earnings driven, because think about where we are right now. It's at roughly 6,000 if we open up and where the futures are. 10% upside. We're looking at 8-9% earnings growth. So, and the risk I think is probably that number might get taken higher. Multiple basically stays kind of constant, give or take a little bit. So it's really mostly an earnings story for next year.
Are there sectors that screen better for you guys here at this point? Like a lot of folks are saying, if we're going to get some of this pro-economic agenda, maybe some deregulation, maybe some taxes, I want to be in cyclicals. Do you kind of fall into that camp? Or are you saying, I'm just sticking with my technology names.
Well, we like technology. We still think that's a secular story, right? It's kind of agnostic to some extent of the policy outcome. That's what makes it attractive. On the cyclical front, I think financials, that's one of our attractive sectors. And you can kind of multiple reasons why. Deregulation or less sort of onerous regulation, that will kind of come down the pipeline, likely. A pickup in corporate activity, M&A, IPOs, again, so certainly it's the big money center banks, definitely should benefit from that. And ultimately, we still think the Fed's going to be cutting rates. And, as rates comes down, that should benefit financials as the kind of curve re-steepens. So there's cyclical drivers, there's structural drivers that I think, financials, among the cyclical space, that's what we like right now.
When you did your PhD at Yale, you did it on IPOs. Paul and I were living lunches. There'd be 3 lunches in one day. There was this effervescence on the street, which you wrote about authoritatively at Yale. Okay, great. Do we want to go back to that milieu, or are we lucky that we're here where Paul's going to one lunch every 90 days?
Well, I can't speak to Paul's lunch preferences. While you were doing the 3 lunches, I was in the bowels of Barney Library, kind of working away at my discipline.
But the heart of the matter is, and we had a guy in from BlackRock, Labadie, earlier, we're now at a point where there's 4 phone calls made on an IPO. Do you want it or not? Yes or no?
So I don't think we're going to go back to what it was in the 90s. I mean, there's just regulation changes that will sort
Reg
of
FD and all
that. But also Sarbanes-Oxley, there's fewer companies that would want to go public. We did see frothiness back in the second half of 2020 and the first half of 21, the SPAC mania. So there's definitely, that is possible to kind of come back. But I think the closest we've seen for IPOs is you go back pre-pandemic when Uber went public, Airbnb. There was a period in 18, 19 where there's a little bit of that, but it was at a much more modest scale. We weren't seeing stock prices go up 700% on the first day. I mean, those days I think are gone. We could see them go up 60%, 70%, but not that level of frothiness before.
All right, the PhD from economics from Yale, I don't know why you would ever do that. The undergraduate, Tom, he goes to the University of Manitoba, so I have to Google Maps Manitoba. That's how ignorant I am of Canada, the geography of Canada. If you're not in Winnipeg, there's nowhere to be in that province. I mean, right? I mean, I'm looking at this map here. If you're not in Winnipeg, where are you?
Well, Winnipeg is the big city. It's the capital city. The next biggest city is going to be more like about 50,000. But it's a lot of beautiful wilderness. If you love to fish, amazing. Fantastic for fishing, fantastic for lakes.
Hudson Bay, up on the upper head.
How low of cold? The record cold I have is 21 degrees below zero, Plymouth, New Hampshire. How cold did it ever get in Winnipeg where you were up there?
I mean, the coldest days will be below minus 30 Celsius, so I'm around minus 25 with a wind.
With that Canadian
so the wind chill's worse.
Is anybody going to beat the Winnipeg Jets this year? That's all we want to know.
I'm fingers crossed. I think they're looking really good, but there's Florida's a tough team. The Rangers are a tough team.
Tom,
the Rangers always lose it about the 3rd week of March.
We'd have to go to Winnipeg.
Not like the Maple Leafs.
No. I mean, Tom, let's do a remote from Winnipeg in January. We'll get Lisa and Mateo there.
I will join you if you do that in Winnipeg.
Okay, promise. If we go to Winnipeg, Draho will be with us. Jason Draho, thank you so much. Really important conversation on asset allocation and rebalancing there. He is with UBS.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast. Catch us live weekday afternoons from 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern. Listen on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Or watch us live on YouTube.
Wendy Schiller, is the professor from Brown University, joins us. I'm listening to Nikki Haley, Wendy Schiller yesterday, and as far as I'm concerned, Lisa, don't let the mascara run. Lisa's crying. Professor Schiller, the campaign for 2028, did it start last night with Nikki Haley going after RFK Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard?
Well, it's certainly an indication that she's not going anywhere and that she feels like she got some votes when she ran against Trump in the primary. She has a constituency and she's trying to position herself as viable. It's a long time to work, the next couple of years, but the first 8 months of this administration may be successful in accomplishing some of the president-elect's stated goals. But after that, parties fall apart a little bit. Majorities are hard to sustain. And so she's positioning herself as somebody who looks viable very early on. So
DNI's intelligence, and this is the former governor of the Carolinas, quote, DNI is not a place for a Russian, Iranian, Syrian, Chinese sympathizer. When they get in front of the Senate or the House or just they're working in the machinery, Wendy Schiller of your Washington, how's that going to play with the middle of the road America?
Well, I mean, I think the calculation that Republican senators have to make is which of these nominees and their issues. And we know we have sexual assault allegations, we have child sex trafficking, drug use, we have sympathizing with Iran and Russia. We have a whole list of things. Which will catch fire? Which will actually resonate in their voting constituents' communities? Which will voters care about? Right now, voters sent a signal saying fix inflation, fix our cost of living, and make sure that we have a future in terms of economic growth. That's what they've said. Will they care about this now? Probably not. Could they care about it later if these people get confirmed? Possibly.
Surveillance correction. It's an important one. It's Tulsi Gabbard. Okay.
Gabbard, okay.
I mispronounced it because I'm an idiot. I wasn't trying to be snide or something. I don't want people to read anything into it.
Not
Excuse
at all.
me.
All right, we got a surveillance correction.
Lisa yelled at me.
She did. Well, she's on top of these things. Yeah. So, Professor Schiller here, give us a sense of how you think this Republican Senate is going to view some of these nominations here, particularly some of the ones that have been flagged as maybe troublesome, such as Mr. Gates and Ms. Gabbard.
Well, we're obviously seeing some attempts by the administration-elect to get Gates through. It's typical to have nominees meet with senators. I'm just looking, for Lisa Murkowski, Susan Collins, particularly for Hegseth and Gates. What happens? Do they vote for them? And if there are cracks in the coalition and they get through, will those cracks grow as each nominee is voted on? So which of the most problematic nominees do you put first? That's going to be John Thune's problem, right? And his challenge. Which one does he get through first? If the most problematic one gets through first, then you don't have a lot of big problems. But, I'm going to be looking at those two senators and senators who are thinking of running for re-election in 2026. And because Kamala Harris lost, there seems to be some impression that the female vote isn't going to respond to these kinds of things. No, women are like everybody else. They prioritize what they worry about. In this case, it was budgets, it was schooling, it was all sorts of things that hit close to home. But behavior still might matter. And so this is the calculation that Republican senators have to make, particularly on some of these nominations. Tulsi Gabbard, Nikki Haley was former ambassador to the UN. She does know the international community. And I think if she's raising alarms, then I think some Republican senators may be listening.
Professor Schiller, is just all this a precursor for every single minutia decision, not minutia decision, like it's Latin. You got to do that with your Brown University. Every single minutia decision, Wendy's going to be made out of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue?
Oh, it's very difficult to do. I keep reciting this with you about Ronald Reagan, right? He said I would, issue a decision or a request that would take a week to get a response. In the White House, the federal government is massive. To move it quickly is very difficult to do, even for the Trump administration. But the question of Congress, with that very slim majority in the House, we have to see what happens when they start really making cuts to programs and people that are in Republican districts. And there are a lot of federal employees who live in Republican-dominated districts and Republican states. Yeah. And if they have a life change or their job goes, then Trump will hear about it. How that dynamic plays out, we're going to see it probably in the summer.
Philip Bump killing it in the Post yesterday on the mandate. I went nuts yesterday with David Malpass, Professor Schiller, Trump supporter, when he said this was a mandate election. You're expert at this, back to 1883, if not back to Adams, Jefferson. Was that a mandate election, Professor?
Well, it's tough. I mean, I think by my calculations, he's just under 50%. That's what I think we have right now in terms of the vote tallies. So under 50% is typically not thought to be a mandate. It would have been a stronger argument had the House Republicans picked up any number of seats, but it looks like they'll have the same exact vote majority that they had in last session. That does not suggest, as I thought earlier, that Trump's coattails would be long and strong. I'm wrong about that. They were not that long and strong, and that's the big test usually with a mandate. And then, getting people back in the office is something private sector has been wanting to do. It is true that, you could have expected Trump to say, everybody come back to work. That's something I think the Musk, they're right about that in the sense of that was always going to happen. And so I think that's something that will be really interesting to see. And its impact on D.C., by the way, as a city. The irony is that it could resurrect downtown DC, which would be something I
Right.
think most people would agree is a good thing.
Yeah, it feels like it
not
down there.
everything not everything they propose will be met with opposition, and not everything will be successful or a failure.
20 seconds. Professor Schiller, is a Taubman Center at Brown going to 5 days a week in the office?
We are excited. We're launching a school of public policy July 1st, so we are excited to really be all of us on our game. That's my answer there.
There was a the general counsel passed that at Brown University. Wendy Schiller, thank you so much, particularly those comments on our Constitution and our civics that is out there.
This is the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast. Listen live each weekday starting at 7 a.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Joining us now, the conversation of the day on technology. We had Dan Ives earlier with us from Sikorsky. Gene Munster joins us now. Really pleased with that, of course, with Deepwater Asset Management. Gene, what is the moment we're in? Paul Sweeney and I did important AI seminars for Anurag Ran and Mandeep Singh yesterday with Adobe, with Salesforce. There's Nvidia earnings and the rest. You've been doing this forever. What moment are we in the next year in American technology?
We're in what is going to be the most, I think, exciting year in innovation over the last 50 years. And it's hard to really put language on it to capture what the concept of infinite intelligence or close to infinite intelligence at almost no cost means for humanity. And so as someone who has been around for the internet and saw the boom and bust of that, I think this is going to be more significant. And I think that next year, if you think about the markets, I've been talking about this 3 to 5 year bull market. And so I started talking about that about a year ago. So we're going to say we got 2 to 4 more years. It's going to end in a spectacular bursting of the bubble. But I think next year, from just a broader market perspective, I think we're going to see another incredible year. And I think that it's driven by substance around AI, going from a build out to starting to move to more applications. We saw a little bit of that with Snowflake today. Of course, we've seen most of the excitement around the hardware, including Nvidia. But I think we're going to start to shift to slowly see more performance in software specifically. But just I'm just really excited to be alive at this time in life. It's just a really special moment.
Hey, Gene, when I talk to people about AI, I often quote you, because I remember talking to you maybe 18 months ago on this program, and you put into a kind of a framework of a compendium of kind of where you view AI relative to, say, the internet, to electricity. Can you just review that for us? Because it's so powerful to give people a sense of how you view the potential impact of AI.
So it's a 0 to 100 scale, and 100 is the most impactful, most transformative. But at 25, I would put mobile. At about 35, 40, I would have the PC, the internet at 50. And obviously, these all build on themselves. But if you look at them as a standalone, so the internet is 50. I think AI is probably 90, and electricity would be 100. And I think AI would be greater than electricity if not for the fact that you need electricity to run these machines, of course. But this is a big deal, Paul, and that's a lot of hype. There's a lot of hype in that. I think the substance will exceed that hype.
Yeah, but you're, Gene, when someone like you makes that analysis, a lot of people like myself, we pay attention here as we try to get our minds around AI. What's the next step here? It feels like we're so early innings on this, but it feels like we're now at the discussion point where
the next step is one of your kids needs a Mac.
Exactly.
Needs a new laptop.
New laptop with the AI.
Just so you know, that's the next step.
That's the next
step.
step.
This weekend.
Exactly. Gene, are we at the point now where we really have to make the use case for AI applications, maybe the return on all this investment that we've seen?
I don't think we're at that point. I think we're going to start to see some of that next year, and that has been the hesitancy around this whole AI trade, is that the I think the skeptics would say that we just really haven't seen those incredible, breathtaking use cases yet, but they will ultimately come. And I think that what we saw with the Nvidia earnings last night, and specifically this demand, I mean, this is incredible. I've never seen a story like this. They did $21 billion in revenue in calendar 22. They'll do, call it $140 billion in revenue next year. There's nothing been anything like this. And when you see that, what they're doing is they're building the infrastructure. We're still largely in this building infrastructure phase, Paul, but some of these breathtaking applications that will change basically all forms of our life, I think we're going to start to see those a little bit later next year, specifically to this concept of agentic AI. It came up a lot on the Nvidia call last night, but this idea of these agents going out and actually getting work done for us, I think that's going to be the big change, how we're all going to interact with these agents.
First thing we're working, Gene Munster with us here right now, folks. Thrilled he's with us. Dan I was with us earlier as we look at technology in America. Munster with Deepwater Asset Management. Gene Munster, I look at the Apple A&R. Used to be part of the sell-side racket. Loved it at Piper Jaffray years ago in Minnesota. But Gene, I'm looking at, okay, I got 40 buys, but the fact is I got 18 holds. I got Apple in a trading range since June. It's buttressed up now near new highs. I assume Gene Munster thinks Apple's going to break out. How is it going to break out? What will be the catalyst? At the top of the income statement or on downward?
It's going to be at the top, and it's going to be either later this fiscal year, kind of the June quarter-ish of next year, I think is a potential breakout, or in fiscal 26. And I think it's inevitable that this happens. And to put some numbers around it, what that breakout is that the street's looking for iPhone growth in fiscal 25 to be around 6%. And for fiscal 26, a pretty similar number. I think that can be 10 to 15%. And ultimately, all this talk about AI, the vast majority of people still don't use AI. And if you look at the number of ChatGPT on a daily basis, it's probably about 150 million, 200 million people. If you look at Meta's products, that's about 3.2 billion. Wow. If you look at Instagram. And so this is still a fraction of the use. But what is special about what Apple is doing is taking these tools and just making them accessible to everyone. And I think that, well, today those features really don't light up your life. I think that as they roll more of them out, it will become more clear to people that they have to upgrade.
If I were to put together kind of an ETF for AI, because I'm trying to get some exposure to AI, but maybe I feel like I've missed the Nvidia trade.
Wait. Are you asking for one of your kids?
Exactly. I need a basket.
You just emailed in for one of your kids.
I need a basket of AI. How else are you thinking about kind of getting exposure to, again, this really seminal shift in technology?
Paul, I'd be remiss not to mention we have an ETF. The ticker is LOUP. It is Frontier Tech, and it basically gives exposure to AI themes that are outside of the mega caps. So if you're looking for some smaller companies like Vertiv, for example, that does cooling, it was mentioned on the call. These are the sub kind of $200 billion. So have to mention that LOUP, but nice, I would say that more broadly, I still think we're in a period where the hardware piece, this is a contrarian view. I think the hardware trade is going to continue to be stronger than expected over the next several quarters. And then, as I mentioned, kind of exiting end of next year, I think, what we're seeing with Snowflake, I think you're going to see more and more of that in software land kind of later next year. But that's kind of how I think about it, still in the hardware piece and then moving to software later on.
Okay, LOUP. Up 35%, 3.5, up 35%, 1 year trailing. Robinhood's your number one holding. How do you have Robinhood is part of AI?
So what they're using is as part of how they assess risk with customers. They use AI. They also use AI as a means to go and generate new customers. So for doing outreach. So they've been proactive at doing that. So it's companies like Robinhood. There's another company that we looked at recently to add to this was like Crispin Green. It sounds crazy, but they have a big robotics initiative going on. So it is these companies that are starting to implement AI kind of under the hood.
Yeah.
Hey, Gene, Snowflake. I am looking at Snowflake. Stock's up 25%. Can you tell us what Snowflake does and why the stock is up so much today?
So what Snowflake does is it's called a data warehouse, which means that you take data. It could be anything from structured data inside of a business. Structured data would be data that is in like an Oracle database, and it warehouses it so AI models can train on it. It basically makes data more accessible and usable for training. So that is what they're benefiting from, is just more training and more enterprises starting to use this. Their biggest competitor, where they've been losing share, the reason why the stock has not done well before today, is called Databricks, and they have a data lake where you can just throw in PDFs and Excel documents and just throw a bunch of data into this data lake, and then it organizes it for you. But that's what's going on with Snowflake.
Gene, first question to Eli Greenfield yesterday at Adobe. Is all this fancy Gene Munster, Dan Ives talk, is it going to take our jobs away from us?
Well, as an asset manager, I think that's a very real potential. I think as an analyst, it's a little different. At Deepwater, we launched an affiliate company a few months ago called Intelligent Alpha. And it basically is machines picking, it's just machines picking stocks. There's an ETF, LIVR, Livermore. But I think it is, it's something, I just mentioned that in context too. It's one of two things is going to happen. Either it's going to take our jobs as an asset manager. I would say for you and Paul and your team, you need not worry.
Yes.
One of the things that AI won't take away is community and empathy. And that's things definitionally that can't be done. And I think that's what you guys bring every day.
Well, we have community. Do we have empathy, Lisa? I don't,
That's a stretch.
It's like pushing the envelope here a little too much. Gene Munster, hugely valuable. We get a huge response when he's on.
This is the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast. Listen live each weekday starting at 7 a.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also watch us live every weekday on YouTube and always on the Bloomberg Terminal.
You better not have Chris Sale in this, Lisa. I'll tell you that. Your daily look at the front pages of Lisa Mateo, our anticipated Lisa Mateo.
Okay, it's the end of the year, right? Accounting departments racing to close the books, so they have all these expenses to go through, and they got to get them through. So now what they're finding out is a lot of workers are pushing the limits with those company credit cards. They're finding things. They're telling the Wall Street Journal people are buying things like Christmas gifts, jet skis, cruises, plastic surgery. They're even charging their monthly mortgage payment because they're disguising the lender as a business vendor. So this is kind of coming under scrutiny now as, the end of the year. Like, people are under the gun, so they're trying to rush these things in.
Would not allow this, I don't think, here at Bloomberg.
He would not.
No. All right. Interesting.
No way.
I mean, I know people got like some of these spending accounts and they got to flush the money before they lose it and all that kind of stuff. Okay.
I had a beverage of my choice once with the evil Laura. She's in charge of all of our auditing, and she told me a couple stories. I mean, Laura told me, and she said, "Tom, you're competing."
Yeah, exactly.
Next, it's out of hand. No, seriously, it's and we're like everybody else. We monitor it as
We do.
We do.
So yesterday we talked about the Comcast spinoff, right, of the cable channels.
Yes.
And Paul, it's funny because you and Alex and I were talking about this.
Right.
What about these MSNBC staffers? Like, they're going to start to be in a panic. Well, sources actually telling the New York Post, MSNBC stars Rachel Maddow, Chris Jansen, Katie Tor. They had this tense meeting at 30 Rock, led by NBC Universal Chairman Mark Lazarus, who's going to lead the company. And they say staffers, they're fearing layoffs. They just want to know, is it going to change the logo, the name, the headquarters?
Oh, I see.
Lazarus said that he just wasn't sure.
Great.
So it
Good
wasn't
answer.
like a good sign.
No.
But it's just MSNBC, since the election, their ratings have been tanking according to Nielsen. And people, MSNBC, CNBC, they cross-use a lot of reporters.
There's
and
the financial side, which is always interesting.
Mm-hmm.
But the editorial side will be very, very interesting. And the heritage, going back, pushing 30 years, back when it was Microsoft NBC. I mean, there's a lot of heritage here.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, again, you just think kind of where the country is these days. Where is MSNBC and its editorial background? Where does that kind of stand up? And again, it's a standalone company. You can't hide behind the Comcast broadband and cable television numbers.
Fascinating. And of course, we're all looking at this, folks, on the island of Manhattan. I mean, it only focuses on 3 zip codes.
Right.
There's a zip code off Sunset Boulevard here in New York. Next, Lisa.
All right. If you're going shopping, New York City's Fifth Avenue, it is no longer the world's most expensive shopping street.
Really?
Okay, this is according to a new list from Cushman and Wakefield. The number one is now Milan's, let me see if I say this right, Via Monte Napoleon.
I'll go with that. Yeah, it's good enough. Good enough. I like it.
Napoleon. It has the first spot, the
Napoleon.
first time a European city topped the list. So it gets the rents globally from about 138 luxury shopping districts. So this one topped it. The reason why it's so expensive is because it's a shorter street than everyone else on the list. So it's about $2,000 per square foot. That's, a little bit higher, 11% than they paid the year before. So Fifth Avenue came in second, and London's New Bond Street, that came in third.
Okay, that's right. Well, Milan, one of my favorite hotels in the world, Hotel Principe, Savoy.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Savoy.
can I tell you where ground
Wow.
zero is on
Took
this?
care of me.
It's three Via Monte Napoleon. And that would be Fendi Milano Monte Napoleon. And yes, it's $2,000 per square foot. Every time you walk a square foot, it goes ka-ching.
Ka-ching. Nice.
Nice.
Love Milan.
Next.
And finally, here's our kicker. So this piece of artwork, a duct tape banana, it sold for $6.2 million at Sotheby's in New York. 6 minutes of fierce bidding, and yes, we did have it. It's called The Comedian, okay? It's a sculpture artist, Maurizio Catalan. The buyers is China-born crypto entrepreneur. He's going to consider lending it out to people. He said even if Elon Musk wants to take it to the moon, he's more than welcome.
In 2019, if it was $1.5 million and they popped the sucker at $6 million.
Yes.
Tang is our, I'm drinking Tang Zero this morning. But, if you were to duct tape an orange onto a wall, that's got to be worth $800,000.
And you have done it. Right? I love our YouTube viewers who can actually see it right behind
full
you.
disclosure, folks, Mr. Bloomberg, with his wonderful philanthropy, is expanding out on Madison Avenue to the Gagosian Gallery building, which is, it's right across from the Carlyle. It's a spectacular building, and Mike and the architects are doing it justice. And I think it's some of those galleries in Gagosian's building. I'm sorry, the orange tape to the wall.
Yeah, look at this, folks on YouTube. Tom, we have
see it
an
behind.
orange tape to the wall in homage to the banana. What do we get for the orange, do you think?
It's called Still Tang.
What can we
Still
get?
Tang.
It's a still life.
I just want to know if it's the same banana from 2019.
Is it? Yeah, exactly.
I don't know. It doesn't say.
It's what we call an installation. If you read Art News,
Okay. The latest installation.
it came from Art Basil, I don't know, Miami.
Basel, yes,
Sassower
yes.
goes to, Damien goes.
Yes.
Alex Steele, I think, goes.
Probably.
I've never gone to Art Basel.
No.
Down in Miami. McGlone.
Yes.
He is so tasteful. When he goes, he wears socks.
Exactly. It's formal.
Are you done?
I am
Is that
done.
all you have?
I love your addition with the orange tape to the wall.
Okay, I got a live chat here, YouTube, that Wicked is going to flop. What do you think, Lisa?
Ooh, I don't think
Telegraph butchered it in London.
Ariana Grande,
Ariana Grande,
kids, all the kids are talking about it going. They're dressing up, some of them.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, it's an event.
Oh,
just like how
whoa,
Barbie
whoa.
was.
Lisa Mateo, are you going dressed like Ariana Grande?
No, I'm going to
movie?
Gladiator.
Okay, you're going
So
into
who
the
do you want
mob.
to see at Gladiator? Sure.
I don't know. I just love that Denzel Washington's in it.
Yep,
I'm a
yep.
big fan of
cool.
Denzel.
Yep.
So.
Lisa Mateo, thank you so much. Our newspaper segment.
This is the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast, available on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. Listen live each weekday 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern on Bloomberg.com, the iHeartRadio app, TuneIn, and the Bloomberg Business app. You can also watch us live every weekday on YouTube and always on the Bloomberg Terminal.